The truck was locked. The phone was still on the seat, but the hunter who drove here was gone for 3 years. The forest gave no answers. Search dogs lost the scent. Helicopters scanned the snow. Nothing. Then, a terrified farmhand whispered about a barn, a place where chains rattled, where shadows lingered. And when police opened the door, they looked up and froze. The small town of Ashton, Wyoming, still slept under a pale winter sky. At 4 in the morning, Mark Ellison was already awake. He moved through his kitchen in silence, every motion deliberate. On the table lay his rifle case, a thermos of coffee, and foil-wrapped sandwiches. Mark checked each item twice. For him, hunting was ritual orderly, precise. Outside, frost clung to the window glass. The thermometer on the porch showed 9 degrees below zero. Snow had covered the ground for weeks, pressed flat by the biting wind. Laura Ellison stirred in her sleep down the hall. Their daughter, Rachel, just 16, shifted under her blankets. Neither woke when Mark pulled on his boots. He lifted his rifle, slung his backpack, and zipped his jacket to the throat. The air outside cut into his lungs, sharp as broken glass. The red 1999 Chevy Silverado idled in the driveway, its exhaust curling upward like smoke from a chimney. Mark climbed in, turned the heater on high, and set the thermos beside him. The truck's headlights carved 2 pale tunnels through the darkness. At 4:05, he pulled away from the house. His route was familiar, north along the 2-lane highway, past the frozen creek and the empty gas station. Every mile was one he had driven countless times before. By 6:20, he reached a Shell station on the edge of town. A surveillance camera caught him entering. Hood pulled up against the cold. Inside, he bought a stick of gum and a plastic bottle of water. The cashier, a woman named Diane, later remembered nothing unusual. He looked calm, unhurried. He smiled politely, paid in cash, and left. That was the last confirmed sighting of Mark Ellison alive. The Silverado rolled north into the open hills. Above, the first color of dawn spread thin streaks of gray and pink. The forest waited, silent under its heavy coat of snow. Mark knew these woods better than most men. He had hunted here for over 20 years, every trail, every ridge, every hollow memorized. He favored the glades about 25 miles outside Ashton. Deer crossed there early in the morning, moving between timber and open ground. The weather that day was perfect. Clear sky, no wind, crisp snow. He expected to be home by dinner. Laura always made stew on his hunting days. Rachel usually set an extra place at the table, waiting for her father's stories. But evening came, and the chair at the table stayed empty. Laura glanced at the clock. 9 o'clock. No call, no message. She tried his cell phone. No answer. The device went straight to voicemail. Her worry turned to fear by 10. Mark had never missed a check-in. Even if he stayed late, he always called. At 11, Laura phoned Eric Dawson, Mark's closest friend. Eric said he hadn't spoken to Mark all week. He knew nothing of his plans that day. By midnight, Laura dialed the Ashton police. The officer on duty told her the rule: 24 hours before filing a missing person report. Helpless, she spent the night calling every hunter she knew. None had seen Mark. No one knew his route. The night stretched into morning, filled with silence and dread. At dawn on December 2nd, Laura returned to the station. This time, Detective Alan Hughes met her. He had worked missing person cases for 2 decades. Hunters had vanished before, usually lost or injured. But this was different. Mark was experienced, disciplined, cautious. Hughes took the report seriously. Within hours, he organized a search. Volunteers and officers assembled at the edge of town. 12 men and women set out with 2 trained dogs. They spread through the snowbound hills. Their first goal, find the Silverado. 3 hours later, volunteer Robert Lang spotted the truck. It sat on a dirt spur road 18 miles north of Ashton. The Chevy was locked, its windows frosted, its tires half buried in snow. Inside, investigators found maps, a spare jacket, and an empty thermos. The rifle and backpack were gone. On the driver's seat lay Mark's cell phone. The last call logged was from Laura at 8:40 p.m. It had gone unanswered. The phone battery had since died. No footprints marked the snow around the truck. The wind had scoured the ground, erasing any tracks. The scene looked ordinary, too ordinary. Search dogs sniffed the perimeter. They picked up Mark's scent, leading into the trees. For a mile, the trail held steady. Then it faded. The ground hardened. Snow melted and refrozen into glassy ice. The dogs whined, circling, unable to continue. The team split into 3 directions, combing the ridges. Hours passed with no sign. By nightfall, they returned empty-handed. The next day, a helicopter joined the search. From the air, the forest opened like a map. No camps, no fires, no sign of human presence. They checked every clearing, every frozen pond. Still nothing. Mark Ellison had vanished. For a full week, searchers scoured 40 square miles. Caves, hunting cabins, ravines, each turned up empty. Every lead collapsed into silence. A pair of hunters reported seeing a man in camouflage near a wooden bridge, but they couldn't be sure it was Mark. The sighting led nowhere. By mid-December, the official search ended. Snowstorms swept across the region, burying the tracks of men and animals alike. The forest closed its secrets under a white shroud. Detective Hughes reclassified the file. Missing person. The case would remain open, but resources were gone. Winter tightened its grip on Ashton. Laura kept calling hospitals, sheriff offices, and even morgues across the state. Each call ended the same. No trace of Mark. Her hope flickered, then dimmed, but never died. Rachel hung her father's photo above her desk. Every night she whispered, "Come home." Every morning she woke to the same empty silence. Mark Ellison Hunter, mechanic, husband, father had walked into the woods that December morning, and in less than a day he was gone. The forest had swallowed him whole. The winter of 2007 bled into 2008 with no answers. Snow pressed deeper into the hills outside Ashton. Each drift felt like a lid, sealing the mystery shut. Detective Alan Hughes kept the file on his desk. He reread it on slow nights, tracing each note, each photograph, the locked Chevy, the dead cell phone, the trail gone cold. He refused to call it closed. Still, with no new evidence, there was little more he could do. The silence in the case echoed louder with every passing week. Laura Ellison carried on in her own way. She wore her wedding band every day. Rachel noticed how her mother twisted it, absent-mindedly, as if holding on to Mark through metal alone. At the grocery store, people whispered. Some said Mark had run off. Others claimed he'd been taken by something in the woods. Laura ignored them. She believed her husband would never abandon his family. But belief could not keep the nights warm. Rachel grew restless. At 16, she filled her room with posters and school books, but the photograph of her father, smiling in his hunting jacket, hung above it all. She told friends that he was out there somewhere, maybe hurt, maybe hiding, but alive. She clung to that idea, fragile as glass. Every December, Laura organized what she called memorial searches. Volunteers came with snowshoes, dogs, and flashlights. They combed the same trails again, posting flyers with Mark's face. Nothing ever came back. The wind erased their tracks, just as it had erased his. After each search, Laura thanked everyone with a trembling voice. Detective Hughes often joined. He walked alongside the volunteers, scanning the trees. The silence of the forest pressed against his ears like a weight. By spring, the snow melted. The creeks roared with thaw. Still, no bones, no rifle, no torn clothing. Hughes called hospitals within 200 miles. He checked police bulletins from neighboring states. Each report of unidentified remains. Maintenance pulled him to the phone, but every lead collapsed. Animal bones mistaken for human. Old skeletons unearthed by the thaw. Decades too old. Laura met with a lawyer. 2 years had passed without proof of life. For the sake of insurance, she filed to have Mark declared legally dead. The court approved, but Laura never stopped setting a plate for him at the table. Rachel noticed. She never said a word. By then, Rachel had turned 17 soyan. She wore her father's old flannel shirts like armor. At school, she spoke little, but her eyes burned when classmates whispered. Detective Hughes wrestled with his own doubts. Could an experienced hunter truly vanish without a trace? He marked dates on his calendar, promising himself he'd reopen the file again and again. Some nights he sat in his office, the file spread open, coffee going cold. He traced the map where the Silverado had been found. He circled the forest trails until the paper tore. In Ashton, life moved on. Stores changed owners. Houses sold, children grew, but for Laura and Rachel, every day was shadowed by the same absence. Local newspapers printed anniversary articles. 2 years since Hunter vanished. Neighbors clipped them, shook their heads, and moved on. Laura cut them out and tucked them in a shoebox. Inside were Mark's letters, receipts, and the watch he had left on the nightstand. She told Rachel the box was proof that he had lived, that he was real. The third winter was the hardest. Snow fell heavier, and the cold drove deeper into the ground. Rachel started driving, her learner's permit tucked in her wallet. She took the Silverado's spare keys from a drawer. The truck had been impounded, then released to Laura. It sat unused, engine frozen by time. Rachel climbed behind the wheel one afternoon just to sit. The cracked vinyl seats smelled of oil and pine needles. On the dashboard, she ran her finger over the dust. She whispered, "Dad, where are you?" Her breath fogged the windshield. No answer came back. Laura watched from the porch, eyes wet. She didn't call her daughter inside. Some grief had to be carried alone. Detective Hughes visited the Ellison home every few months. He asked the same questions, hoping for something new. Laura always shook her head. Still, he promised her the case wasn't forgotten. She nodded politely, though her hope dimmed with each visit. Rachel listened from the doorway, face unreadable. By the summer of 2010, nearly 3 years had passed. The woods outside Ashton had swallowed another season. Tourists hiked the trails, unaware of what had once happened there. Laura tended her garden, back bent in the sun. Rachel worked part-time at the diner. The family lived on, hollowed but surviving. Then, one August morning, the phone rang. Laura was in the kitchen, washing dishes. The call wasn't for her. It went straight to the police station. At 10:17, Detective Hughes answered. On the line was a man named Eddie Moore. His voice shook, words spilling out like he was running out of time. He said he worked on a farm south of Ashton. He said he'd overheard something. He said the name Mark. Hughes gripped the receiver tighter. Moore claimed a body had been hanging in an old barn. For 3 years, the detective's pulse quickened. The man sounded desperate, terrified. He begged Hughes to listen. Before someone came through his door, Hughes took notes fast. Farm owned by Walter Briggs. Conversation about clearing something before an inspection. Moore said the word again. Mark. He swore it was about the missing hunter. Then his voice cracked, and the line went dead. For the first time in 3 years, Detective Hughes had a lead. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The silence of the case had finally broken. Part 3. The barn. 1,100 words. Detective Alan Hughes replayed Eddie Moore's words in his head. A body hanging in the barn. 3 years. The kind of detail no liar would invent so casually. Still, Hughes stayed cautious. Moore had a record petty theft, disorderly conduct, but this was the first solid lead in years. The farm belonged to Walter Briggs, 55, divorced, known as quiet and unfriendly. Neighbors described him as the man who kept to himself. On paper, Briggs looked clean, only a speeding ticket and a noise complaint. But his closest friend was Leonard "Lenny" Cross. Cross was notorious. He bred pit bulls on the edge of town. Everyone whispered he ran underground dogfights. The police had tried to nail him before. Raids, informants, surveillance. Every time, the evidence slipped away. If Briggs and Cross were tied together, something dark hid beneath the farm. Hughes ordered surveillance. For a week, plainclothes officers watched from a hill. The farmhouse sat in a hollow, surrounded by barbed wire and thin pasture. Most days were quiet. Cows grazed, horses shifted in the snow, but twice, a black SUV pulled up. Cross stepped out, heavy coat, cigarette glowing. He stayed an hour, then left. By the 7th day, Hughes was done waiting. He drafted a warrant. A search was scheduled for dawn, August 21st. 2010. The sun had barely risen when 8 officers rolled onto Briggs's land. They carried flashlights, cameras, and a cadaver dog named Rex. Briggs stood in the doorway when they arrived. He looked tired, unshaven, eyes half shut. He asked to see the warrant, then shrugged. Inside the house, nothing unusual. Beer in the fridge, grease-stained tools in the garage. The officers spread out. They opened closets, pulled up rugs. No signs of a crime. Briggs followed, silent, arms crossed. When asked about Cross, he muttered, "Buys hay sometimes." Then he said nothing more. 200 yards behind the house stood the barn. Gray planks, roof sagging, weeds crawling up its sides. A heavy lock sealed the door. Briggs claimed he hadn't opened it in years, just old hay and busted equipment, he said, but his eyes flickered when Hughes pressed him for the key. It took Briggs 10 minutes to find it. Finally, a rusty padlock clicked open. The door groaned as it swung inward. A smell rolled out, not sharp, not fresh, just old, heavy, foul, decay mixed with urine and dust. The barn was dark. The only window had been boarded. Flashlights cut beams through stale air. The space was divided by wooden partitions. Some sections looked like makeshift kennels. Others were open, the floor scuffed and stained. Benches lined the center ring. The dirt beneath them was blotched with dried, dark patches, chains, and metal bowls lay scattered in the corner. Every sign pointed to dogfights, but Rex tugged his handler deeper. The shepherd whined, ears stiff, nose pointing upward. In the far corner, Hughes raised his light. Something bulky hung between the rafters, wrapped in tarp and rope. The team froze. No one spoke. Only the sound of Rex's low growl filled the silence. A ladder was dragged in. Sergeant Nolan climbed slowly, one hand gripping, the other steadying his flashlight. He touched the tarp, then recoiled. Through a tear in the fabric, pale bone jutted. A sleeve of camouflage cloth clung to it. Nolan climbed down, face white. "Get the cameras," Hughes ordered. Photographs flashed, documenting every angle. Then firefighters cut the ropes and lowered the bundle. On the ground, forensic expert Karen Lopez knelt. She unfolded the tarp piece by piece. Inside lay a human skeleton. The wrists were wired behind the back. The skull showed cracks along the temple. The ribs bore signs of blunt trauma. In the jacket pocket, a wallet. Inside, a driver's license. Name, Mark Ellison. Beside the bones lay a knife in a leather sheath. The initials M.E. carved into the handle, and a metal flask, dented but intact. Hughes's throat tightened after 3 years of silence. The case had answered itself in the darkest way. Mark Ellison had been here all along. The forensic team worked until nightfall. They cataloged blood traces on the floor. They collected chains, ropes, and a scorched metal plate stamped with a dog's head, an emblem of Cross's ring. Briggs was arrested on the spot. He demanded a lawyer, refused to speak. Cross was picked up the next morning. At first, both men denied everything, but the barn told a story too detailed to dismiss. A story of violence, cruelty, and cover-up. Hughes stared at the bones as they were carried into the van. He thought of Laura. He thought of Rachel. 3 winters of waiting, praying, wondering, and now the truth was tangled in rope and tarp. A hunter who had once known every trail had become a prisoner above a blood-stained ring. For Hughes, the hardest part remained. He would have to knock on Laura's door and tell her what they had found hanging in the rafters of a barn.